Hey everybody, what would you like to talk about this week? Acting. That's a great idea. You read about 12 pages in the book on acting. Hope you did. Hope you wrote some things down. We'll repeat a little bit of that information. I'm going to introduce you to 2 or 3 important people that are also talked about in the book, but I'm going to give you a few video examples. What is acting and how do you do that? Let's find out. Clearly, what you just saw and heard was Sir Ian McKellen, one of the finest actors of this or any other generation, having a little bit of fun with Ricky Gervais. He was certainly minimizing what it means to be an actor and what his process was. So we're going to look at 2 or 3 different theories of acting. There are many, many, many different approaches to acting, many different schools that you can study acting in, but as with anything in life that you undertake, the greatest teacher is going to be your personal experience. Before we get into that, however, we're going to take a look at another example from Middle-earth. How about that? Did you realize Benedict Cumberbatch had played Smaug? There you go. So number 1, I want you to think about Benedict playing a dragon. Whether you've seen the movie or not, did you find his performance believable? Just watching him in that clip with all of the electrodes and CGI technology that was helping him, if you didn't know better, would you think Benedict was actually the dragon Smaug? I, for one, believed that Andy Serkis, who played Gollum in all 3 of the movies, really should have been nominated for an Academy Award for his portrayal of Gollum. But it was such a technology-enhanced performance, they really hadn't invented a category for that yet. But regardless of all of the gadgetry that went into helping him create that character, I still hands down think it was one of the greatest acting examples of modern movie making. My humble opinion. So, number 1, acting is believing. Burn that into your memory. What does it mean to you? Have any of you ever acted before? Have you been in any plays? How extensive was the process of bringing that character to life? We're going to look into a little bit of the history, the evolution of acting as an art form from its humble beginnings as a form of mere storytelling. Let's see what happens. Basically, we're going to look at 2 different approaches to acting. One would be a more physical approach that believes if you get the physical characteristics of a character down, the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they dress, then that will help you create a believable persona for the audience. You heard Ian McKellen joking, right? That he puts on a nose and a hat and he has his lines written for him. And as soon as the director says action, then he pretends. All right? There's so much more to it than that. And Ian McKellen would tell you the same thing given more time. The other approach to acting would be a more internal approach. That you have to do a lot of research. You have to get this character's history. You have to fill notebooks with information. You have to learn how they think, why they believe the things they believe. And then finally, and this is almost a third approach to acting, an actor really wants to tap into their own, what we call sense memory. You learn to tap into emotions you had at one point to try to identify and empathize with the character. More on that later. Basically, an extreme example would be if you were asked to play Macbeth, but you say to the director, I can't play this part. I've never murdered anyone before. The director might ask you, well, have you ever killed a fly? There you go. So you start with what you know from your own past and build upon that so that you get to a point where you believe you are the person you are. That's why we say acting is believing. But hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Where did it all start? You might think acting began in ancient Greece. You wouldn't be entirely wrong, but you wouldn't be entirely right either. Acting began when storytelling began, and that predates ancient Greece, going centuries before that to East Asia, where storytelling was the main form of entertainment. We don't have records of that period, so a lot of this is based on illustrations like we have here. We know a lot of the stories that survive from that period, and we know that No theater, which still survives in Japan and is still popular, really qualifies as the oldest form of live theater, again, predating what we've learned about ancient Greece. And because part of this course is to be able to compare and contrast traditions of Eastern Asian drama and theater with contemporary Western forms of theater, here's a quick glimpse at No theater. Hold on. How about that? Unlike anything we've seen so far, or is it? So No theater was clearly a very stylized, ritualized theatrical presentation. They relied very heavily on stylized, slow movement. They wore masks so that you knew what character was speaking to you. And their form of vocal delivery or acting was also very stylized as well. This is simply what the audiences of the time had come to expect because that's what had evolved. This directly relates to the acting we saw and will see again in ancient Greece. Remember the masks, the robes, the chanting, the dithyrambs, and the way that acting evolved in Greek plays from just being chanted by a chorus to actors stepping out and taking on different roles. So, ancient Greece really does get the credit for evolving the art of acting. But you ask, what is it? How do I act? Maybe we can find out. Who are your favorite actors? You don't have to answer. I can't hear you. Who are some of your favorite actors? Who do you go to the movies to see? And why do you like them? So do think about that. Write down a few responses. It's bound to come up on a quiz or a weekly check-in. Now I've cheated a little bit because all of these actors are accepting their Oscar awards, which of course is for great film acting, not theater acting. Here we are in the middle of a pandemic with virtually no live theater, so let's talk about people we know. Why do you like Meryl Streep or Leonardo or Halle Berry? Any of these people? Is it because they continually surprise you by becoming different characters? Are they funny? Or is it just something about their persona that you enjoy going to see in a movie? Here's some quotes I like from different actors. Take your time. Please don't feel you need to memorize them, but do get the general idea of what each of them are saying. Here's a common thread that I appreciate in each of these quotes. None of them talk about really pretending to be a completely different person. They're finding things in a character that they can personally relate to. That's a big reason a lot of people become actors. One of the benefits, say, in grade school, high school, college, in acting classes, is that students get an opportunity to step into somebody else's shoes. They get to learn empathy. They get to see the world through another character's eyes. So that's a real benefit of studying acting, even if you don't intend to win an Academy Award at it. There's a saying in theater and amongst actors, don't do it unless you have to. How about that? I'll let you think about that one for a minute. Only do it if you have to. Moving on. Are you ready? You already know a little bit about acting because you do it in everyday life. Whether you're aware of it or you prepare for it or you study how to do it, each of us has what we call social roles. And these are simply the roles we play in everyday life. Student, parent, a worker, an athlete. It's how other people view us. We also take on personal roles. The class clown, the chronic liar, the good true friend who will always help people out. So on the left we have examples of social roles, on the right, personal roles. There's a subtle difference here. The social roles are really how other people perceive us. Personal roles are personas that we willingly take on. These are mentioned in your textbook as well, so if you've got some questions about it, go back and review that part. So the differences between acting in everyday life versus acting on a stage are these. An actor really does the work to make sure they're portraying a believable character. More than likely, they've also really trained their physical body and voice and mind, so that their body, voice, and mind do what they want it to do. Number 3, don't get confused by this. Synthesis and integration is what I was talking about earlier. The two different approaches to creating a character are either physical or emotional, external versus internal. At some point through your training to become an actor, you synthesize the two so that the inner life matches the outer life. I think I made that pretty clear. What do you think? Here we go. Going back to our friends in ancient Greece, we know that Thespis was probably the first chorus member to step out and say, hey, I'm going to become a character now. And drama and theater were changed forever. Take a look at the space they were performing in. It's huge. So imagine our actors all the way down on that raised stage. And then imagine the audience sitting in the very back row of this amphitheater. The people speaking on stage had to be really well trained in order to project their voice to the back row. We took a look at the example of no theater earlier. Let's revisit a clip from this very stylized production of Oedipus and see if we can make a few connections between those two acting styles. The next step in the evolution of acting was when actors during the medieval period actually took to the streets, literally riding on their pageant wagons to present their performance at the next town. Again, they're outdoors. Their acting style had evolved quite a bit, so now we had identifiable characters on stage. This led to the art form we call commedia dell'arte. That sounds Italian because it is. Commedia, I'm mispronouncing it, commedia dell'arte basically means we had a set of stock characters on stage. And each of these characters was so well identified and known by the audience because of the costumes they wore, the way they delivered their lines. And this is why the audience came to see the plays, because they kept seeing the same characters over and over in different situations. I am not going to bore you with naming, there are a lot of them, at least 12. Stock characters. But what you do need to know is that we still see these same stock characters and variations of them today in situation comedies like Cheers, like Friends, like the Flintstones, maybe even characters on Grey's Anatomy, Chicago Hope. I'm out of touch with contemporary television. But these characters are still funny to us because they're universal. It's really just that simple. We're going to jump ahead a little bit, 1850-ish or so, to a period we call realism in theater. I'm going to take my time with this because there's a lot to know. Basically, what was going on mostly in Eastern Europe and Russia to begin with was that the theater was changing. People were no longer happy just going to the theater as a form of escapist entertainment. They wanted to be educated. They wanted to see characters and situations that they could relate to. So the plays that were being written really were more realistic. And you can tell from the set here that the sets were also as realistic as they could possibly make them in theater. So, when you start writing realist plays, you have to develop a new form of acting that conveys the same thing. You're not going to put commedia dell'arte characters into a realistic situation. It just won't make sense. Are you with me so far? Good. So the concern became, how do we help our actors become more believable on stage? Here's an introduction to Konstantin Stanislavski. Remember that name. Realism became known as naturalism, basically because the approach to acting became focused on natural acting as opposed to what the video you just saw talked about being grandiose, symbolic gestures. So we needed someone to develop a school that would teach actors how to behave more naturally on stage. And here we are, Mr. Stanislavski. This will be an easy name to remember because it's really the only Russian name I'm going to ask you to know. Read for yourselves, please. So as you saw in the video, he was working with a group called the Moscow Art Theater. He was an actor, became a director, and developed a whole series of exercises geared toward helping actors behave more realistically. That's all. So remember the quote from the beginning of the presentation. Acting is believing. And this is what he's saying. You cannot go on stage not fully convinced yourself about what you're doing and who you are, and expect the audience to go along with you. This is an external video. Sorry I didn't edit this slide out. Please ignore. Here we go, a little bit more about Stanislavski, whose influence was far-reaching and still being felt today. Do not memorize any other names on this chart. I show this to you just to illustrate how many other acting teachers and directors studied with Stanislavski and developed their own branches of acting. So, one really important thing to point out about Stanislavski, his early work. He began training actors from the outside in. In other words, getting the physical characteristics of the actors down in order to create that inner life. Later on, you see, he actually changed his mind and said, oh, maybe it works the other way around. We'll develop the inner life of the character and then let that affect the external life. There you go. If you're going to become an actor, you don't have to pick and choose one or one over the other. More than likely, you're going to put the two approaches together and come up with something that works for you. Couple of vocabulary terms I want you to know. Stanislavski and future teachers were very concerned with what motivates a character. Actors as well really have to understand why they're entering a room or leaving a room. Think about that for yourselves. The next time you're going in a door or out a door, what lies beyond that door? What do you want to get that's on the other side of that door? That's what your motivation is. And if you're going to develop a believable inner life for the character, you have to know why you're going through a door. The second paragraph there, he talks about given circumstances, and that's what Ian McKellen was talking about earlier. The script has been written. All of the information you need to know should be in the script, the given circumstances. As a character, you have your objective. I'm going to open this door. Your super objective is really the bigger picture. You're opening the door because you know a better life lies on the other side of it. You are opening the door because there's someone on the other side of that door that you need to kill. How about that? Those would be examples of super objectives. Basically, what does your character want out of life? And how are you going to achieve that with all of these objectives? Are you all doing okay? Throwing a lot of information at you. Please let me know what doesn't make sense. All right, I told you I wanted you to learn 3 names. Here's number 2. A gentleman in France, Francois Delsarte. He was operating around the same time Stanislavski was, but the style of theater they were doing in France at the time was not the realism that was happening in Russia. We're going to talk a little bit about what we call melodrama, which I'm sure you know the term. It basically means overacting. So Delsarte, through observing people, he said, came up with a whole system of physical gestures that would convey the emotion of the character. So his approach was very, very external. This should tell you that I am experiencing grief. This is me thinking very, very hard. We'll see some examples. But there are, in fact, picture books filled with photos or illustrations that will show you what he considered to be the correct physical gesture to convey the emotion. It was not believable acting. As you'll see in this short video. Some examples of melodrama or overacting. Now, this style of acting remained popular through the first couple of decades of silent movies. What's that, you say? Movies used to not have sound? It's true. So silent movie actors, not having a voice that the audience could hear, really had to use this same sort of melodrama in their gestures to convey silently to the audience what their characters were experiencing. If you haven't watched any silent movies, highly recommended. They're very entertaining. Okay, here we are in the modern day. And by modern, I mean early 1930s. Lee Strasberg is name number 3. I want you to get comfortable with. He had been a student of Stanislavski and brought his techniques to the United States at a time when theater in the United States was becoming really, really realistic and emotional and psychological and emotional. So actors had to keep up with this new type of theater, which meant that his approach to acting had to change as well. He took Stanislavski's ideas and really, really refined them into what we still call method acting. What is method acting, you want to know? The young lady in the photograph here is a very young Marilyn Monroe. She really was a great actor. It's too bad most of the movies we have of her are just being a bombshell. But she was a serious theater-trained actor, as are most of the actors you enjoy seeing on television and in movies. Most all of these performers have come from theatrical backgrounds, which is why they're so good at what they do. Basically, the goals of method acting are these. Each one of us carries with us through daily life our own unique physical and mental habits. We carry a lot of stress. We feel certain pressures from society and from our parents. So the main goal of method acting is just to get rid of all of that stuff so that we can access and release the inner life of the character we're portraying. It's just that easy, except it's very difficult to do. So these bottom two, emotional recall and sense memory, we'll take a look at a short acting exercise that you can try at home. and experience each of these for yourselves. So go get yourself a cup of coffee as you're watching this video and play along at home. So the goal of method acting, again, emotional recall and sensory recall are simply ways for you to internalize the emotions and the actions of the character you're playing. Think about it. It makes sense. If you're taking on a completely different character, the way you move, the way you act, the way you open a door, pick up a cup of coffee, these are going to be someone else's actions. Make sense? All right, here are some extreme examples of what we call method acting. Now, to be fair, method acting isn't used nearly so much in live theater as it is in movies. And the reason is this: the camera is going to get so much closer to the actor and reveal so many more details about the actor to the audience than would ever, come across on stage. That's why many of our top actors go through so much trouble to really become the character they're portraying. Here are some prime examples. If you've seen the movie Marathon Man, you'll know what Laurence Olivier is talking about. This is a fascinating movie to watch because, on the one hand, you had Sir Laurence Olivier, another one of the greatest actors who's ever lived and performed on stage and on film, and Dustin Hoffman, who really considered himself a method actor. So the night before Dustin's big scene, where he was just running all day, he stayed up all night just to really get that feeling of exhaustion, which prompted Laurence Olivier to say, why not try acting? Brilliant. Just in case you haven't had enough of Death of a Salesman, we're going to watch one of the more emotionally charged scenes. And watching it, just make mental notes about how believable the characters are. See if you can figure out what their objective and their super objectives are in this scene. And really, what makes the acting believable, in your opinion? Okay? Now, of course, you don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to be an actor. Maybe you do, but it takes a lot of work. Some of the physical challenges for actors are pictured right here. We talked a little bit about plays by Samuel Beckett, the woman who is buried up to her waist and then up to her neck in sand. That takes quite a bit of physical stamina to be able to hold yourself still that long. There are modern-day productions of Shakespeare that are essentially aerial acts or Cirque du Soleil type performances. As an actor, you really want to be able to control your body in order to get it to do what that character would do. You never stop training to be an actor. There are vocal exercises you do every day. You really do. Again, the difference between acting for the camera in movies and acting on stage is significant. Remember our ancient Greek performers who had to project their voice to the back row of the amphitheater. The same is true in modern day theaters. You have to be able to make yourself heard, and that takes a lot of training and a lot of energy as well. Other than that, you're wanting to know, what about me? How do I become an actor? There are many, many paths to becoming an actor. You don't have to go to school. You don't have to study acting. You could just be a natural-born actor. It's happened. If you're Meryl Streep, you graduate from Yale. If you're an up-and-coming young actor, you're probably going to look for a college or, hey, a community college that has an acting program. There are many, many acting schools in the United States and abroad dedicated to the theater arts. They're not so active currently because we're still trying to figure out how to make a comeback after, the recent lockdown. Bottom line is you figure out what you think you want to do if you're going to become an actor, and you find a way to do it. Talk to your friends, talk to your counselors, listen to actors on Inside the Actors Studio. Really figure out what other people have done to get where they are and see what might be possible for you. Making a living as an actor is a whole different thing. Precious few actors really get to make it big. If your goal is not necessarily to make it big, which would mean winning a Tony Award or an Academy Award, which definitely increases your market value as an actor, then maybe you're going to be happy just doing theater whenever you can and wherever you can. There's not a lot of money in it. You should know that professional actors belong to a union, Actors Equity, which was founded in 1913. Actors Equity is a really powerful union. They negotiate contracts for actors. They make sure professional actors have adequate health coverage, health care. There are retirement homes through Actors Equity for aging actors. They guarantee the safety of the environment of the theater you're performing in. So Actors Equity, a really good thing. Can't believe I made it all the way through that. This is a relatively easy week. I think we're only tackling acting. I will try to squeeze puppetry in with directing next week. As I said in the email, I'm in the process of revising the syllabus because a couple of things have come up that the school would like me to do to help assess, what you're learning out of the class. So I'll figure all of that out and post it over the weekend. Meanwhile, please remember the weekly check-in on Friday. If anything here was unclear, anything you want to talk about, shoot me a text or an email and refer back to the textbook, which should make more sense since you've seen this PowerPoint. All right, take care, everybody. Be good to yourselves and to each other.